Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing well. In this video, we're going to be doing an updated Mastering with Waves plugins tutorial. I've been getting many requests to revisit this, share some of the new plugins, some of the new techniques that I'm utilizing in my own mastering process. We're going to build our mastering chain from scratch today, and I'm going to let you download this completed Studio Rack chain as well as all the individual presets for the plugins. If you want to utilize it outside of Studio Rack, I will have that available for you. So stay tuned for the link at the end of the video. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the mix and we'll dive in.
I had to get it out the mud, and now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. You know the city show me love, and I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. Remember we was running dumb. If I call you brother, I'ma love you like my blood. Had to get it out the mud, yeah. Became a legend where I'm from, yeah. Remember we was 30 deep cooling on Pop's porch, while my brother pushing keys like he was Sky Storage. Ballin' was the dream, but we was off court.
All right, so that's our mix. You see that we had some headroom here, about 3 or 4 dB. You know, I don't think you need an excessive amount of headroom these days, you know, prior to mastering. Before we dive into the thick of the plugin chain, we're gonna do a couple of preliminary things just to set us up and give us some targets to work towards. First thing, I'm gonna go ahead and just load in WLM Plus, and I wanna set an LUFS target, which is going to determine the ultimate, you know, numerical value for our loudness, our integrated or long-term measurement. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the short max and short min just so it's not giving me any warnings. And then on our LUFS target, I'm gonna go for somewhere around -10, maybe closer to -11. I think that's gonna be a good goal for this song. If you start to try to push your integrated LUFS level too much, you're gonna end up with a master that has no dynamics. You're gonna really destroy what was worked for in the mix. So just be, you know, somewhat conservative in terms of how high this target number is going to be for you.
I had to get it out the mud, and now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. You know the city show me love, and I forever held you down whenever I ran it up.
We got a little ways to go to reach that target, but we have some room to work with. All good there. The next thing I want to do is set up a limiter. We'll go ahead and just park the limiter or the maximizer as a safety net. We want to hear how those plugins are affecting the levels there. We're going to use something a little bit different today. I don't believe I've covered this one on the channel, but it's one that I've been using a lot more recently, which is the L3 multi-maximizer. Now we're going to get into the real details and the nitty-gritty of setting this up in terms of multi-band limiting, which is very, very powerful. But right now, we're just going to park it just below 0. I'm going to change a couple of settings here initially. The master release, we're going to change to aggressive because I want to get more impact out of this. That tends to be the one that's going to give you the most impact, the most loudness, and be the most transparent. So we'll set that, and we're just going to leave that be for now. All right, getting into the core processing of our mastering chain here, I'm going to go ahead and set up a parallel split. For those of you who are not familiar with Studio Rack, this is a very powerful feature that allows you to set up parallel processing with the click of a button, and we can add up to 8 different processing chains on there. However, we're just going to utilize this as a parallel for our bus compression. In this case, we're going to dial in the SSL bus comp. So we'll go ahead and we'll find that's the G comp here. Commonly, you know, people will just send their entire mix through the bus comp, or they'll send their entire drum bus through the bus comp and just let this kind of glue things together. But for this type of track, you know, I don't really want this to, you know, kind of suck the dynamics out of it. I want to actually add some perceived loudness. I do want to add some glue, but again, not at the sake of kind of crushing my mix and turning it into a pancake, taking the energy out of the drums. I'm going to turn the attack back. We're going to set the release to auto, and we're going to use a 4:1 ratio.
I had to get it out the mud, and now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. You know the city show me love, and I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. Remember we was running dumb. Boy, if I call you brother, I'ma love you like my blood.
And then we'll bring this down, and we're just going to blend this in.
I had to get it out the mud, and now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. You know the city show me love, and I forever held you down whenever I had to get it out the mud, and now I'm riding through my old hood. show me love, and I forever held you down.
Just a nice lift in perceived loudness. We get some glue there, but again, we retain all those dynamics and that punch in the drums in the low end. Moving on, we're going to utilize an EQ to give us a more exciting top end, give us some of that professional sheen. I know when we get to some of the dynamics processing, many of you may ask why we're doing the EQ first. And, this is preference, but also I just find that in terms of results, boosting and then sequentially cutting or taming afterwards just gives you a more precise sound, gives you more control over that tone. So let's go ahead and pull up the Manny EQ. This has become, not only one of my favorite Waves EQs, but just one of my favorites in general. I believe they modeled a few different pieces of hardware EQ from Manny Studio, and it just has a really nice tone to it, especially in the top end. So I'm going to dial this into 12.5K and give a little boost. And you want to kind of push it a little beyond what you're going to dial it in, just so you can hear exactly what is being boosted there, and then kind of rein it back to where it's more comfortable, if you will.
And now I'm screaming R.I.P. I'm going hard for him. The city love me, I'm a legend on my side of town. And where I'm from, it wasn't much that we could smile about. I was fighting depression, the buzz started dying down. I promised my brother, we gon' make it like we tryna. Finally finding out who really, who fake. Seen day ones turn fit and start building a cake. Put away the bottle.
Next up, we're going to utilize a dynamic EQ to kind of soften and smooth the extreme top end. It's going to give us something similar to what tape processing or even some of these analog hardware processors would do in terms of just giving us less harshness and just more of a pleasant, more rounded sort of sound for our master. I'm going to select the low pass here, and we're going to dial this in at probably about 15K, which is kind of common for something like a tape processor. And then we're going to dynamically affect this, but let's just say we turn this down just so we can see where we're cutting. I'm going to leave the gain at 0, and we're going to turn the range back to about maybe 3-4 dB here.
And now I'm screaming R.I.P. I'm going hard for him. The city love me, I'm a legend on my side of town. And where I'm from, it wasn't much that we could smile about. I was fighting depression, the buzz started dying down. I promised my brother, we gon' make it like we tryna. Finally finding out who really, who fake. Seen day ones turn fit and start building a cake. Put away the bottle on my mama, I'ma deal with the pain. Thought if I got it, you got it, but now that feeling has changed. Crazy thinking about the dirt that we did.
So let's just solo that real quick so we can hear. Some of that unpleasant top end, we're just actively controlling that. Next, I'm going to go ahead and just dial something in at about 8K. I feel like the hi-hat brightness is still sticking out just a little bit, so we're going to kind of fine tune that. And luckily with, the dynamics processing we have, we can really dial that in even here in the mastering stage where I don't have control of that individual element. So let's solo a band 5 and just kind of find where that hi-hat is sitting specifically. I think that's the right area there, so let's go ahead and dial this in here. I'm going to leave the gain at 0. We'll bring the range back.
And now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. The city show me love. And I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. Remember we was running dumb. Boy, if I call you brother, I'ma love you like my blood. Had to get it out the mud, yeah.
Once again, only getting a couple of dB a reduction there. Let's take a listen to what we've done with the F6 here.
And now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. The city show me love. And I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. Remember we was running dumb.
So still bright, still present, but now a little bit more welcoming and inviting, warm sort of overall tone with that dynamic EQ. All right, you still with me? I got some gems here. The first one is a plugin that you just turn on and things just sound better. I've been using this for a long time, and that is the Aphex Vintage Exciter. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to set the mode here to mix 1. I'm going to go ahead and turn the output back to 0 because we're just going to be blending this in. We'll turn the mix all the way back, and let's slowly bring that back up.
And now I'm mourning with their portrait in my tattoos. Yeah, if you ask me, I'ma tell you I'm okay. But it hurts me that I'm lying to your face. I've been practicing, I'm working every day. I've been learning how to smile through the pain. Now I'm mourning with they portrait in my tattoos. Yeah, if you ask me, I'ma tell you I'm okay. But it hurts me that I'm lying to your face. And I've been practicing, I'm working every day. I've been learning how to smile through the pain. Just took my new homie on a trip down my old block. Pointed out my brother's crib because that was the dope spot.
Once again, a seemingly small addition, but adding more excitement, more detail to the mix. That's what a lot of mastering is all about, is taking these subtle changes, putting them all together, and you end up with a big difference. Let's talk about setting up our width for the master stereo imaging. We're going to utilize a plugin called Vitamin. First thing I'm going to do is just set our crossover points for these bands, and I'm going to set the low to 120. Because I want to dial in the imaging specifically for everything below that. That's where your bass is going to be sitting in terms of a subwoofer, big speakers, and we want to really mono and narrow that out. We don't want a lot of imaging in our low end.
And now I'm mourning with they hurts me that I'm lying to your face.
So there's very little width in the low end of this mix anyway, but I just want to make sure that I really mono all that out. A lot of you are looking for tools to mono out your low end. Vitamin is a very easy and quick way to do it. Let's go ahead and set our low mids to maybe like 1K or somewhere around in there. High mids, we'll go like maybe 5,000. And then our top end, we'll punch in 9,000 here.
And now I'm mourning with they portrait in my tattoos. Yeah, if you ask me, I'ma tell you I'm okay. But it hurts me that I'm lying to your face. I've been practicing, I'm working every day. I've been learning how to smile through the pain. Just took my new homie on a trip down my old block. Pointed out my brother's crib because that was the dope spot. Had to get it how.
So I'm just going to excite the low mids a little bit, give us a bit more thickness to the master. And I also widened that. And some of you are going to ask, well, how do you know how to widen things and how much to widen things, when not to widen things? Something that's going to make it easier at least is to have this solo control, listen to the bands individually and adjust them that way rather than trying to do it in the context of the entire master. At least initially, you can really focus in on, what this width is doing to each individual band. And if it does something that's not pleasant, don't mess with it. Don't try to make things overly wide. And you don't necessarily need to make things really narrow if it sounds exciting to widen it a little bit.
And now I'm mourning with they portrait in my tattoos. Yeah, if you ask me, I'ma tell you I'm okay. But it hurts me that I'm lying.
So right there, as I widen it too much, I think some of those elements just don't sound as pleasant to me with more of that wide image. This is very similar to the process of, mixing and balancing. It's just listening critically and deciding, how things sound best in terms of the stereo field versus level.
And now I'm mourning with they portrait in my tattoos. Yeah, if you ask me, I'ma tell you I'm okay. But it hurts me that I'm lying to your face. I've been practicing, I'm working every day. I've been learning how to smile through the pain. Just took my new homie on a trip down my old block. Pointed out my brother's crib because
as we widen the extreme top end, you could hear that it just makes some of those individual elements sound more brittle on their own, and it's just going to make our mix a little bit more harsh. So I'm actually going to narrow that extreme top end.
I'ma tell you I'm okay, but it hurts me that I'm lying to your face. And I've been practicing, I'm working every day. I've been learning how to smile through the pain. Just took my new homie on a trip down my old block. Pointed out my brother's crib because that was the dope spot. Had to get it how we live and I promise it won't stop.
So we really anchor our low end, our extreme low end for subwoofers, for big speakers, keep that monocentric. We add some thickness with the excitement to the low mid, and then we're really focusing everything in terms of the stereo image by adjusting our bands here on Vitamin. All right, so hopefully you made it with me thus far. We're going to cover something very, very useful that many of you may not be familiar with. And it's also a point of interest just in terms of limiting and maximizing and getting us to our final loudness. Many of you are going to be familiar with seeing a limiter or a maximizer that processes, the entire signal. We're not able to control the different frequency bands of our limiting. And what that means is if you have a really heavy low end, maybe you have some elements in your mix that are just kind of standing out in a certain band, those are going to kind of make the maximizer or the limiter work harder overall and at the detriment of your entire master and loudness, versus if we have maybe a problematic area or maybe an area that we want the limiter to kind of work less hard on. With this L3, we can actually control those bands individually. But let's go ahead and just dial in the threshold and the ceiling to a point to get somewhat close to our final target loudness. So we'll go ahead and pull up WLM plus, and I'm just going to pin that over here so we can keep an eye on things. We'll reset that, and then we're going to slowly bring down our threshold to get somewhat close to our -10 target.
Get it out the mud. And now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. The city show me love. And I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. Remember we was running dumb. Boy, if I call you brother, I'ma love you like my blood. Had to get it out the mud, yeah. Came a legend where I'm from, yeah.
So that's going to be pretty close to the target. I'll probably bring it back a little bit. But you see, we're getting a little bit of attenuation on each of these bands, but you can just kind of hear that the low end is really getting worked harder than everything else, obviously, because it's a low end heavy mix. But again, we can utilize this priority control here on the L3 multi-maximizer to say, don't focus on that as much. Don't try to kind of rein that in as much. So if we change that priority, you'll see these little markers in terms of a threshold, they'll change, and they'll also change in relation to one another. So let's go ahead and set our crossover points here. Once again, we'll do, more of our subwoofer centric low end. I'm going to dial the low mids up just a little bit here. Maybe in the 300 range. High mids, that's about right, but we'll put that up towards 1500. And then our extreme high, maybe we'll bring this back down to about 4K. For the low end priority, I'm going to turn this up. You'll see our level represented here on this meter, but we want to set that so that, again, that priority is not as high.
I had to get it out the mud. And now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. The city show me love. I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. Remember we was running dumb. Boy, if I call you brother, I'ma love you like my blood.
So I'm just going to turn the release time down. I want that to react very quickly if it is going to attenuate things. And you see, once again, as I turn the priority up, it is going to attenuate that band less so we can retain our low end and work on getting the loudness out of some of our other elements. So let's move on to the next band here, and we'll set that priority accordingly.
I had to get it out the mud. And now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. The city show me love. And I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. I had to get it out the mud. And now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. The city show me love. And I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. Remember we was running dumb. Boy, if I call you brother, I'ma love you like my blood. Had to get it out the mud, yeah. Came a legend where I'm from, yeah. Face ain't crispy like my brothers, plus my daddy like they dead too. I had to get it out the mud. Now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from, the city show me love. I had to get it out the mud. And now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from, the city show me love. I forever held you down whenever I ran it up.
So I want the limiter to kind of hone in and make the top end more of a priority. So we're going to do just that. We're not going to bring that up as high. Let's put it maybe, just above 0. We'll leave that.
I had to get it out the mud. And now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. The city show me love. And I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. Remember we was running dumb. Boy, if I call you brother, I'ma love you like my blood. Had to get it out the mud, yeah. Came a legend where I'm from, yeah. Face ain't crispy like my...
This is something that's going to be invaluable for you to retain that low end, but then also control the loudness and the maximization and the limiting of the other bands. Now, once you've kind of set that, you can then go back and add additional gain to the bands. So we've got that limiting happening, but then we can kind of bring things back up if you need to.
I had to get it out the mud. And now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. The city show me love. Running dumb. Boy, if I call you brother, I'ma love you like my blood.
So I'll bring the gain of the low mids up, just like a half dB to make up for some of that limiting. All right, so everything's sounding pretty good here. Let's go ahead and do a final A/B. I'm gonna disable the limiter first. I know some of you are gonna be more sensitive to that gain increase. So we'll listen to everything without the limiter, and then I'll engage those for you.
I had to get it out the mud, and now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. The city show me love, and I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. I had to get it out the mud, and now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. The city show me love, and I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. I had to get it out the mud, and now I'm riding through my old hood. This is where I'm from. The city show me love, and I forever held you down whenever I ran it up. Remember we was running dumb. Or if I call you brother, I'ma love you like my blood. Had to get it out the mud, yeah. Became a legend where I'm from, yeah. Remember we was 30 deep cooling on Pop's porch, while my brother pushing keys like he was sky storage. Ay, ballin' was the dream, but we was off court. And now I'm screaming R.I.P., I'm going hard for him. The city love me, I'm a legend on my side of town. And where I'm from, it wasn't much that we could smile about. Was fighting depression, the buzz started dying down. I promised my brother, we gon' make it like we tryna.
All right, y'all, so hopefully you picked up some new techniques, a couple of plugins that are gonna be helpful for you. I know these have been helpful for me and something that's really expanded my toolbox in terms of mastering. If you have any questions about the plugins or the techniques that we utilized in the tutorial, feel free to leave a comment below. I also have a link below in the description to download this Studio Rack chain as well as all the individual presets for the plugins. If you learned anything in the video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing. Hit that notification bell for more, and we'll talk to you soon.